Commissioner Willie, Commissioner Fai, and we're missing Commissioner Rogers and Commissioner Trees. Okay, we will give them just a few more minutes to join in. For the committee members that's already present, I just want everyone to know I received my second dose of COVID vaccine yesterday. I'm definitely feeling, yay! I'm definitely feeling it today though. So if I appear just a little spacey and a little slow, that's not your usual Washington County CFO performance.
I understand. I got mine last week. It was just a little chills during the night, and then it was a little foggy the next day, but Advil took care of it.
Yep.
Well, thank you for getting vaccinated, Jack. So we have Commissioner Treese as well.
Yes, Madam Chair, we're just missing Commissioner Rogers, but you do have a quorum and we are all set live on YouTube.
Well, what do you say we get rolling, Jack?
That sounds good. I hope Commissioner Rogers will join in when he can. So good evening. Thank you everyone for joining in tonight's Budget Committee meeting. This is specifically for Washington County's North Bethany County Service District for Roads Budget Committee meeting. And this is for fiscal year 2021-22. Next slide, please. I'll pass it on to the County Commissioner, Tanya Angie, for a welcome remark.
So Jack, actually County Administrator. I won't take the title of a County Commissioner.
So my apologies.
That's okay, Jack, we're a team, and I have to say that Jack has been doing amazingly well as your CFO today, despite having his vaccination. So thank you, Jack, for being here. So just to introduce myself, because I'm still relatively new to the county, I am Tanya Angie. I'm the County Administrator, and I started in August of 2020. Next slide here. So Jack is going to help lead us through introductions, which we'll start with the commissioners, then community members, and then presentation staff. Jack?
Thank you, Tanya. So we will start with Chair Harrington.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here and serving on the North Bethany County Service District for Roads Budget Committee. And I'll pass it over to District 1 Commissioner Nafisa Fai.
Thank you, Chair Harrington. Hello, everyone. My name is Nafisa Fai, and I'm District 1 Commissioner. And I'll pass it to Commissioner Treese.
Thank you, Nafisa, Commissioner Fai. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for attending. I'm Pam Treese. I'm Commissioner for District 2. And with that, I will pass it on to Commissioner Willie, District 4.
Well, thank you, and certainly thank you for joining us and your commitment to the county and keeping us honest on our budget numbers. Roy has given me his proxy, so I get to be 3 and 4 tonight. Is that okay, Tanya? No, that's probably not okay. All right. So anyway, welcome everyone. Jack, yeah, got to stay strong through this second shot. I had a little bit of what was mentioned by somebody else. I didn't see who it was, but yeah, I had a little chills and things like that. So take a nap, you know, and just let Tanya run with it tonight. And you can just take a little nap. So anyway, thanks for being here, everyone. And I'll pass it back to Chair Harrington.
Thank you. And at this point, we have the 4 community members who help make up this budget committee. So Ms. Beachy, would you mind starting first?
Hi, my name is Sarah Beachy, and I've been on the Roads Committee for, I guess, about 4 years now, I think. I think it came on in 2017. So proud to serve.
How about you, Dan Reed? Are you there? You are, Dan.
Yes, hello. I'm Dan Reed. I'm also a community member, coming to you from the playground with my son while my other son's playing Little League. So,
Great.
he can say hi too.
Thank
Been on
you.
here about 4 years. Thanks.
Yes, we are family friendly here at Washington County. Mr. Zhu, how about you?
Hi everyone, I'm good. My name is Fuwa, last name Xu. I'm the first time to be a committee member for North Bethany Road Budget Committee. Thank you.
And thank you for being here tonight. Mr. Young.
Yes, ma'am. I'm Bruce Young. I'm also a North Bethany resident. This is my 4th year actually here. We bought in early. And I'm very happy to be a member of this organization. And this is my 2nd year.
Well, thank you. The 4 of you really help make sure that our staff is doing a good job in following up on the community service district for roads there in North Bethany. So without further ado, go ahead, Pam. Commissioner Treese.
Pam's okay. It looks like Roy Rogers has joined us. Maybe he would like to introduce himself.
Thank you. Commissioner Rogers, would you like to say hello? Not sure if he's got his connectivity all set up yet. So we'll come back to him. I do see that we have other staff members here who are all part of our presentation team tonight. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jack and Jack Leong at this point.
Thank you, Chair Harrington. And then next, we will go through the staff as part of the presentation team. Tanya already introduced herself. My name is Jack Liang. I'm the Washington County CFO. And then we'll move on to Latricia Tillman next.
And good evening, everyone. My name is Latricia Tillman, and I'm the Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer for Washington County. And I'm not sure who to pass it on to.
I can take care of that. Thank you, Latricia.
Thank you, Jack.
Yeah. Next up is Stephen Roberts.
Hi, good evening. I'm Stephen Roberts. I'm the Director of Land Use and Transportation, and I'll be walking you through the budget presentation tonight.
Thank you, Stephen. And then last but not least, we have Sheila Jamborani.
Good evening, Sheila Jambroni. I'm with the Land Use and Transportation as their Administrative Manager, and I'll be assisting Stephen with the presentation tonight.
Thank you, Sheila. I am just doing another quick check on Commissioner Rogers. Looks like he might have left the meeting and trying to reconnect. So we'll let him chime in when he joins in. Next slide, please. So I'll quickly go over today's agenda. Today, we already done the welcome and introduction. That's the first item out of the way. And then the committee has 2 actions to take tonight. One is to elect a committee chair for this budget committee. And then the second is to review and adopt the budget hearing procedures, which will be conducted on May 26th of this year. And then we'll go into the general information, which includes fiscal year 2021-22 county-wide budget major themes. And then we also want to speak to the equity, diversity, and inclusion in the budget process and plan. And then lastly, but also for the public's benefit, we will do a quick introduction of the various special districts at Washington County before we roll right into the fiscal year 2021-22 North Bethany County Service District for Roads budget presentation. And then we'll talk about the next steps, mostly involving about the budget hearing as well as the budget adoption. And then we'll adjourn the meeting. That sound good to everyone?
Yes.
All right. Next slide, please. So if I may, since we don't have a committee chair yet, if I may help facilitate this part of the conversation, is there a nomination for the committee chair for this year on the budget committee?
I'll not.
Sorry, Daniel, you were cutting out just a little bit. We didn't hear your nomination.
Sorry about that. I nominate Sarah Beachy.
All right, is there a second on the floor? Or before we move on to second, is there any other nominations?
Well, Sarah, are you willing to be our chair tonight?
Yes.
Well, then I'll second that nomination.
All right, we have a nomination and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Or raise your hand.
Aye.
All right, any
Thank you.
opposed? No opposed. All right. Well, Sarah, you are the committee chair. Hopefully you have received a little document that I sent as a part of the guide for committee chair, but you're a veteran budget committee chair already, so you know the drill. So the next part of our night is of our committee action is review and adoption of the committee procedures. And that was included in the email communication to all of the committee members. Hopefully you had a chance to take a quick look. It illustrates the general rules and procedures to go over the budget hearing, where the budget committee will deliberate and also offer public testimony time. So it will start on May 26th. It will start at 5:30, and then the public comment is starting at 5:50 time certain. Is there any questions in your review and of the committee procedures or any discussions? All right. Well, I hand it over to you, Chair Beachy, to facilitate a motion to adopt the budget committee procedures.
Okay, welcome everybody. It's good to see everyone tonight. I will start by saying, is there a motion to adopt the budget committee public hearing procedures?
So moved.
Do I hear a second to the motion?
Second.
Thank you very much. All right. Will all those in favor say aye?
Aye.
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 Is anyone opposed?
Oh.
Any abstentions? Abstentions? As I read it. Hearing none, the motion passes. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Sarah. Next slide, please. So I will, at this point, I'll hand it over to County Administrator, Tanya Angie, to go over some backgrounds and the major themes of the fiscal year 2021-22 budget season.
Good evening, Chair Beachy and members of the Budget Committee. I am going to keep my comments brief tonight. If you would like to view a fuller set of my comments, you can refer to the YouTube video, which was posted from the first Budget Committee meeting, which met on Thursday, May 13th, and so that is available on YouTube. So this is Washington County's second proposed budget delivered during the COVID pandemic. As a community, we have multiple crises happening at once, including public health, economic, housing, racial disparities, and severe events such as wildfires, snow, and ice storms. I want to pause and recognize my colleagues and point out heroic work of county employees through all of it. We are still in response mode, and I'm here to share we have servant leaders at all levels of this Washington County organization. Related to the pandemic, we remain at high risk, but cases and hospitalizations are beginning to level off. That gives us hope. The spread of the virus and shutdown activity disproportionately affected the Latinx community, both in terms of health and economic impact. This is an area that needs ongoing attention and investment. On the bright side, the side of hope, Governor Brown is shifting the focus from case levels to vaccination rates when it comes to what level of public health restrictions must be in place. This gives us hope, and we are closing in on the governor's target of 70% for significant reopening. Relative to economic recovery, we're still climbing out of a job deficit caused by the pandemic. This is especially in leisure and hospitality industry, again, disproportionately impacted our Latinx community. Joe Tapanga of Eco Northwest pointed out in his presentation to the board a couple weeks ago that many economists are predicting a full recovery by late 2023. This is much faster than predicted. This gives us hope. However, we have caution. Economic recoveries frequently leave some behind, underscoring the continued need to focus on racial equity. Regarding the financial picture, I'm going to let Jack get into some of those details, and there's significant information in the budget summary that you can refer to as well. I do want to point out in the overall county budget, we have been reliant on one-time federal aid. This last year, this came to the county in the form of the CARES Act, where the county received $104.6 million. If you're interested, there is a full report on the use of those funds called Lift Us Up, Keep Us Going on the county's website. There's deep and rich information on the outcomes that the county had achieved with the distribution of those dollars to our community. Now we are approaching receipt of dollars from the American Rescue Plan. This will come in 2 tranches with a total of $116 million. The board is currently starting conversations on where to prioritize that spending. But once again, we need to be cautious because these dollars do need to last in response and recovery through 2024. So finally, I want to draw your attention to the board priorities, budget priorities, which are listed in your document. And these go beyond our pandemic of response and recovery. And you'll hear more about the budget priorities in the YouTube video that I referenced earlier. I do want to talk a bit about equity, diversity, and inclusion, as this is a board initiative since the adoption of the equity resolution in February of 2020. The Office of Equity is already meeting several of the key milestones as established in the resolution, which includes establishing an internal steering committee as well as an external committee, which will be shortly established. In a moment, Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer Latricia Tillman, who you met earlier, will provide a very brief overview of what to expect in the future when equity is part of our budget process. And so I'll just list a few of the other priorities that are reflected in the overall county budget, which includes housing affordability, economic development, transportation, public safety, and capital investments. So I do want to underscore a final thought for you as you approach tonight's conversation. As stated in the beginning, the 2,300 plus employees of this organization have risen to the occasion for our community in ways that no one could have ever predicted. I certainly didn't. I am grateful for their diligence, commitment, and perseverance each and every day. And now with that, I'll hand it over to Latricia Tillman, our Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer.
Great. Thank you, Tanya. And as our county administrator mentioned, we are actually, can you move to the next slide, please? Thank you. We are very early in the process of bringing the equity resolution that the board adopted in 2020 to life. So as was mentioned, this is my first time actually experiencing the Washington County budget cycle. So I'm learning along with many other people how the process works. And so in this budget cycle, we're seeing some thought around how to embed equity within the budget process. And we're also very much looking forward to the following budget year when we can be much more intentional about how equity, diversity, and inclusion show up significantly more in the budget process. So equity, diversity, and inclusion is all about improvement, change, and forward movement. And We've done quite a lot of work, as was mentioned, over the past 8 months to strengthen our equity foundation and learning how this works. But moving forward, here are some of the ways that we will be really intentional about building equity into our budget process. So first is data-driven decision-making. So we really need to understand through the collection of race, ethnicity, language data, and other data on more socially disadvantaged groups, what inequities exist and what the trend lines are over time. And then we need to know which ones are we trying to address through budgetary investments. So data will help us to know which population groups are experiencing the greatest inequities, and then will help us track how we're doing over time, and also help us develop the metrics that are the most meaningful for doing that tracking. Second, we want to be thoughtful and be transparent. So equity work requires us to be transparent in how we are allocating our dollars. So that means including the process that we're using to make decisions, as well as being clear about who's involved in shaping and implementing those processes. We need to clearly communicate our expectation for advancing equity throughout the budget process. So that means after this budget is adopted, starting the next day, basically communicating the expectations for how to build equity into the budget process going forward. And that includes identifying, or in some cases, even creating specific line items to help demonstrate how we are investing in fundamental elements of equity, like language access, interpretation, and translation. Community engagement is also very much central to an equity process. And as was mentioned last fall, we did have 3 community investment conversations. And moving forward, we want to look at how to diversify our budget committees and to expand opportunities for additional community engagement going forward. As we think about equity investments, what we're trying to achieve is equity in terms of access to the services that the county offers, quality of services, and outcomes. So from an access perspective, we need to ensure that the people who are eligible for the services that we provide are not experiencing barriers to those services because of perceived or real discrimination, or barriers like language barriers or accessibility, physical or developmental accessibility barriers. So when we look at our data, we can see if who we're serving actually matches what the need is that we know to exist in the community. And then we need to invest in eliminating those barriers. From a quality perspective, we want to be tracking how our service delivery is meeting the unique cultural norms, values, and social positioning of diverse communities. And that acknowledges that while we are working towards a shared goal, a common goal, a universal goal, the one-size-fits-all approach to achieving that goal doesn't work well for all communities. And so we need to tailor our strategies to meet the needs of communities based on how they are positioned relative to the goal that we are trying to achieve. Quality also means that we're looking at how our investments are transforming the environments that create and sustain inequities. And as I mentioned in the other budget hearing, I had recently heard a quote from Henry David Thoreau that said, "For every 1,000 hacking at the leaves of evil, there is one striking at the root." So quality means, are we striking at the root of the problems, or are we hacking at the leaves? And I'm sure that all of us agree we want to be focusing on the root cause of the situation that caused people to come to Washington County as a safety net government. From an outcomes focused perspective, we want to be making sure that we are seeing equitable outcomes. And oftentimes when we don't disaggregate our data, we miss the stories from communities that are not achieving outcomes because their data is hidden. So by disaggregating our outcomes, we can see, are we seeing an equal return on investment across race, ethnicity, language, and other factors? And that outcome focus is really how we know that we are moving towards equity as a result of our investments. So that, I think, is a beginning conversation for us here, and we look forward to having it more as we go forward with you as budget committee members. So Tanya or Jack, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Latricia. So now, just for the benefit of the public and our New York County Budget Committee members, the county has 4 service districts in addition to the main county's budget. And the YouTube video that Tanya mentioned was a separate Budget Committee meeting that happened last Thursday, which covers the county's overall budget, as well as the service district for lighting number 1 in the list of 4. And then in addition to those 2, we also have the Enhanced Sheriff's Patrol District, the Urban Road Maintenance District, and the North Bethany County Service District for roads. So this meeting, obviously, you're all aware that you're in the North Bethany County Service District for roads Budget Committee. And then I just wanted to point out, in this year's proposed budget summary, the North Bethany County Service District for roads budget is on page 308 and 309 of the proposed budget summary. Next slide, please. So before we dive into the budget presentation that's led by our land use and transportation, I see that Commissioner Rogers has joined back in. Commissioner Rogers, would you like to do a quick introduction, which you missed for the benefit of the committee and the public?
Hello, I'm Roy Rogers. I represent District 3, which is the southeastern quadrant of the county. It has about 7 cities. In fact, I have about 80% of my population that I represent inside cities. So, good evening.
Thank you, Commissioner Rogers. Now I'll hand it over to our Director of Land Use and Transportation, Stephen Roberts, and Sheila Gimbroni to go over the North Bethany County Service District for roads budget.
Great, thank you, Jack, and welcome everyone. This is going to look awfully familiar. We just went through this with our community members and Chair Harrington and Commissioner Treese about 5 or 6 weeks ago. But for benefit of anybody who's watching, we want to just walk through a little bit of background about the district and North Bethany in general, and then we'll dive into the budget more specifically. Next slide, please. So this is just the outline for our presentation tonight. Again, just some background on North Bethany, a transportation funding strategy overview, sort of where things are in terms of development and road improvements up in the area, and then the budget funding projections and proposed budget. Next slide. Next slide. So because you all live there, you're familiar with where North Bethany is, but just for context, again, there's a larger Bethany area in our community plans, and that's the map on the left, shows the larger Bethany area. So it does hug the county line along Multnomah County, up in the far northeast portion of the county, north of Highway 26, east of 185th Avenue. And then on the right, the larger map is a zoom in of that Bethany community plan area, but with a blue line around the North Bethany area more specifically. Next slide. So when the county adopted the community plan for North Bethany, after it came into the urban growth boundary, these are just a few statistics here, a little bit of background. So it's around 700 acres total. There are about 4,200 total residential units expected to develop in that area as it approaches build out. And that 4,200 is sort of the midpoint of a range between a low number of around, I want to say 3,800 and a high number of maybe around 4,500 or 600. So we tend to just sort of gravitate toward that average number. The community planning work was completed in 2012, and then development kicked off in earnest up in North Bethany in 2013-14. At the time when we were doing the planning, we were assuming that we were likely looking at about a 20-year build out of the area. But after 7 years, we find ourselves about 2/3 of the way to build out at this point. So things happened quickly. A lot of that planning work was being done during the Great Recession, and it seemed that we were going to be in the doldrums for quite a while. But as fate would have it, we finished the community planning just as demand started ramping back up for new construction. So the timing worked out well for this project to really hit the ground running. So we have about 3,700 total future residential units have been through the land use approval process. So that's typically the first major step in a development application process, getting the land use entitlement. And of those 3,700, about 2,800 have actually been through the building permitting stage. So those are homes that are either complete and occupied, or apartment units or condos that are completed and people are living there or are in some phase of construction. Next slide. And just give a quick overview of the funding strategy that was adopted as a part of the community plan. Next slide. So the board also, in conjunction with the community planning work, adopted a transportation funding strategy for this urban growth boundary expansion area. And in the project, we'll look at a list and a map here in just a bit, but there were 14 total road improvement projects that were identified in this funding strategy. 12 of those are eligible for public funding. 2 are to be constructed exclusively by development, but are eligible for certain credits against some system development charges, and we'll talk more about that. Again, as I mentioned, we assumed a 20-year build out, and revenues to help fund construction of some of these projects by the public would accrue over time. And we'll jump into this a little bit further, but the funding sources identified in the plan are the transportation development tax. So that is a countywide tax that is assessed at the time that you pull a building permit for new construction or renovation that will result in additional vehicular traffic. So it's very similar to a system development charge, but because it's applied countywide, it's implemented as a tax. And it is collected in unincorporated parts of the county by Washington County. It's collected within cities by the cities as they issue permits. There's also in North Bethany a separate and additional transportation system development charge, so the TSDC. We also, the county committed some major streets transportation improvement program, or MSTIP funds, to help construct some of the identified transportation needs there. Trust and agency is a term that we use for funds that are deposited with the county by a developer who for some reason is unable to construct certain required public road improvements as a part of their development because they have some physical obstruction, or the grades of the new road and the existing road just don't match up for a variety of different reasons. So we sometimes will collect funding amounts from a developer. Those go into an account and then are used at some point in the future to help pay for that improvement that the developer was obligated to construct. And then finally, the reason that we're all here tonight, we also, the board formed the, well, I should say the voters in the area, the property owners formed the North Bethany County Service District for Roads. That is a property tax district. And because we love acronyms, it has a nice acronym there, the CSDR. Next slide. So you saw this map just a bit ago. As I mentioned, this voting district or taxing district was approved by the voters in May 2011. At the time, there were just over 100 property owners in this area. As I mentioned, now we have about 2,800 units that are either completed or in some phase of development or construction. So the number of property owners has certainly grown as development is happening and much more density is coming to the area. That also results in increasing property tax revenues. As new development occurs, that increases the assessed valuation and then generates more tax revenues. The rate that people in the district are paying is $1.25 per $1,000 of assessed valuation on their property. Next slide. I realize this may be just slightly out of order, but this, I just think this is helpful to give a little bit of a picture. I mentioned we have this alphabet soup of acronyms, different funding sources that are being collected in this area to help fund those improvements that are part of the funding strategy. And so what we have been doing, excuse me, for the last couple of years now is we're actually, as those revenues are realized in these different funding sources, you see listed at the top, the Major Streets Transportation Improvement Program, the SDC, the TDT, or Trust and Agency funds. Each year, those funds are rolled into the County Service District for Roads budget fund, which is County Fund 215. So we take those other revenue sources combined with the property tax revenue that's generated by the district and basically pool that money in Fund 215, the North Bethany County Service District for Roads budget fund. And then that's the place where we actually house our construction capital projects using the funding to build the projects that were identified in the funding strategy. So when we talk about the budget, you'll see transfers, and that generally means that we're transferring funds from one of those sources at the top into the budget fund, and then we expend money out of the budget fund for the projects. Next slide. So this gives an overview of the actual intended funding amounts and the rough proportions of the funding that were intended to be generated by those different revenue sources that we mentioned earlier. And unfortunately, some of the names got cut off here a little bit, but there was as I mentioned, MSTIP allocation, that was $10 million. The Transportation Development Tax, the TDT, was meant to be 21.78 million. The North Bethany Transportation System Development Charge is the next slide as we're sort of working our way, I should have said clockwise around the bend here. So in the lower right corner of the pie chart, that's the North Bethany Transportation System Development Charge. That was meant to be about 32, almost a third of the total revenue source. And then the North Bethany County Service District for Roads, about 13.5 or $13.3 million, and about 20% of the overall revenue. And these numbers, when you add them all up, come out to $69 million. Those were planning, that was a planning level estimate of the cost of building the road improvements that we'll see here coming up soon. So the idea was, do we have a plan that will generate enough revenue to build the projects that were identified in the plan? So again, these were all 2011 assumptions, but the intent was that we had different sources of revenue that will provide the needed funding to build those improvements over time. Next slide. So this chart actually shows a little bit about how the revenues have been realized over time. One of the advantages of having the multiple funding sources is that there can be quite a lot of variability in any given year in the development related charges. The system development charge and the TDT are the orange and the gray color respectively, and you can see those numbers have varied quite a lot from year to year. The dark blue, which is the lowest layer, if you will, in the bar chart, is the county service district. So that is the property tax revenue, and you can see that has been increasing over time as more development occurs. The assessed valuation has gone up. And then the lighter blue at the top was MSTIP funding, and we've expended the full amount of MSTIP funding that was committed to the project over a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 year period, or 6, just a little bit that 6th year. So the MSTIP commitment to completing those projects has been exhausted, if you will. We've devoted that money to those projects. And going forward, we'll continue to see system development charge and TDT revenues as additional development occurs until the area builds out. And then at that point, the primary remaining funding source will be the ongoing property tax. Next slide. So we wanted to actually show you in a little bit more detail what the property tax revenue has done over time as well. And so on that other chart, it looked like a pretty small sliver there, but this just kind of helps you to appreciate how much the revenue has continued to grow over time. So you can see, obviously, there was a big uptick in development sort of in the fiscal year 14-15 up through 19, or even this last year, 2021. And so the rate of growth will slow down. So you'll see less increase over time in the in the property tax revenue, but it is, as I said, an ongoing property tax revenue stream. So that will be the funding that will continue to help sustain the needed road improvements in the district over time. Next slide. So I'll walk through a little bit about the status of the development and some the road improvements. Next slide. So this is a map that again shows the North Bethany community plan area and the North Bethany County Service District for roads outlined in the blue dotted line there. Within the map, you'll see there are a number of parcels that are identified with a blue color. Those are properties where we have already issued a building permit. You'll see some properties that have darker property boundaries shown, but are not colored blue yet. Those are lots, building parcels that have been platted, which is required before you can obtain a building permit. The lots have to be created through the platting process, and roadways dedicated to the public use, where there have not been permits issued. So you can see there are a number of lots that have been platted where building permits have not been issued. And then you'll see some very faint colored line work, gray lines, and those are areas that have been through the land use entitlement process but haven't made it to the platting process yet. So those are lots that have been through the development review process, but they have not obtained or can't yet obtain a building permit for those lots. So you can see there are still a number of additional lots that remain to be built on there as well. Next slide. Okay, finally, the project list I mentioned earlier. So there were a total of 14 projects that were identified. The 12 that appear in this upper table on the chart are the projects that are eligible for public funding. And that essentially means that revenues that come into this program from these various sources, and you'll see the alphabet soup listed up in the top bar here, the MSTIP, TDT, the SDC, and the County Service District. So there were, again, assumptions made about total project cost, which projects were eligible for which funding types. And what the color coding is intended to show you on the project list here is sort of the status of these various project segments. So the ones that are marked in green with gray text, those are projects that have been completed, and that's either through development activity, the developers have built the improvement, or a public improvement project, and in some cases a combination of the two. But so you can see 1, 2, 3, 4 of the 12 projects have been completed at this point. The gray cells with black text indicate projects that are partially complete, and in most cases that's because some development has occurred, or again, in some cases it may be that a public improvement has been done, and so some portion of that roadway segment has been completed. And so we have another 1, 2, 3, 4 projects that are in that state. And then the purple line, those are projects where we believe there may be some activity, most likely by development within the next year or two, that may construct some or all of those improvements. So you can see the only project that hasn't really had any completion at this point, work done on it, or isn't pending something in the near term, is the Shackelford Road Bridge over Rock Creek, and that's we can look at it on a map, but that'll be to the west of the North Bethany area. That would eventually provide a connection from North Bethany out to 185th Avenue. And we know there are a lot of people who very badly want that connection made sooner than later, but for a variety of reasons, it's a pretty expensive project, and at this point, the circumstances don't seem favorable to getting that improvement constructed in the near term. So, and we can come back to that a little bit further if anybody wants to talk further about it. And then while we're on this slide, I would just note down at the bottom of the page, there are 2 additional projects, and those are the 2 projects that have to be constructed by development. They were included in this project list so that they are eligible for credits against the developer's payment of their system development charge fee when they pull their building permit. If they have constructed some of these improvements some portion of that improvement is probably eligible for credit against the fees that they would normally pay when they come in to obtain their building permit. And so all of these projects generally are eligible for some sort of credits against those developer charges as well. So developers build the improvements and in some cases can avoid paying some of their system development charge or transportation development tax because they've constructed the actual improvement. Next slide. So this is a map that just indicates where those projects are that were in that list that you just saw. So the little, the yellow circles with the numbers in them reflect the project numbers, and then I've included the list here so that you can correlate those with each other. Where you see projects that have sort of a yellow highlight along the line work, that means that there has been county funded improvements in that project segment. Where you see a solid black line, that indicates that a project is complete. Where you see the dotted lines, those are the projects that we think there may be some pending activity coming in the next year or two, typically by developers. And then there's a red dashed line along Springville Road between Joss Avenue and Kaiser Road, and that's a project that the county currently has under construction right now, improving that segment of Springville Road to 3 lanes, adding bicycle and pedestrian facilities along the bike lanes and sidewalks. So we completed a fairly significant improvement on 185th Avenue between West Union and Springville. We've also improved Springville from 185th over just east of the Portland Community College Rock Creek campus entrance and added a traffic signal at the campus entrance there. We will have this Springville project, the dotted red line will be complete, we think, close to the end of the current fiscal year, the end of June, although there will be a little bit of minor activity wrapping up probably throughout the summer there. And then the Kaiser Road project, the dotted line that you see there, I'll just mention, we've been working with a developer, formerly Polygon, now Taylor Morrison, had expressed some interest in constructing improvements on Kaiser Road and doing that so that it would help them to offset, they would invest in the road improvements directly and then be able to receive credits against their system development charge or transportation development tax. We continue to have conversations with them. They went through a merger process, which slowed things down for quite a while, but they have expressed renewed interest, and we continue to have conversations with them about the feasibility of doing that work. Next slide.
Stephen, just a quick time check. We have a 15 minutes scheduled for this meeting. We can probably stretch it to the hour, but we are at 6:18 right now. And then the next committee starts at 6:30. Just
okay, thank you, Jack. Sorry. I appreciate that. So if you can go ahead and just advance through a few slides. We don't need to read these, and the presentation will be available. These are some projects that have been recently completed. And again, the one that's under construction. Next slide. A few photos of the area. So on the left, you see the end of the Springville Phase 2 project near the PCC campus entrance. We recently constructed a mid-block pedestrian crossing also along the PCC frontage, providing access to a park facility there. And then we recently, on the right side, constructed a sidewalk as an interim improvement at a sort of sharp corner in the roadway where it's quite narrow through there, and people were beginning to start walking through there, which was a little bit scary. So we provided that interim sidewalk improvement. Next slide. This is a couple of photos of the project on Springville that's currently under construction. You're probably living that on a daily basis. Next slide. And I mentioned Kaiser Road earlier. So these are a few photos that show the conditions on Kaiser Road. So you can see in some areas development has made improvements. You'll see in particular on the right-hand slide near the upper part of the photo, the Sato Elementary School on the left completed their frontage improvements, and there's a Polygon development called Ridgeline on the right side where they've constructed their improvements. But there are significant unimproved gaps in between. Next slide. One more slide, please. So Sheila is going to talk us through the numbers really quickly.
Okay, so the budget is pretty straightforward. On the budget page, you do see that the $894,000 is for our taxes that we anticipate next year. The 2.6 million on that page is a breakout between what we anticipate from the SDC funds and the TDT collections. Those are new revenues for the next fiscal year. Then the bulk of our budget is centered in the materials and supplies and the professional services line. So there's 13.9 million budgeted there, primarily for the contracted services for the projects that have been identified. As with any budget, we have some additional charges, indirect charges, advertising, some fees, permits, those types of things. You'll see there's $200,000 for some anticipated infrastructure right-of-way acquisition. And if there's any questions, I do have specific notes on the budget, what's included in the 13.9 million, but in the interest of time, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Stephen.
Thank you, Sheila. Just one more slide here if we can. So after we met with, we have a group that we meet with, our citizen community, our community members sorting on the budget committee, as well as Chair Harrington and Commissioner Treese, and ran through a lot of this same information. And what we ended up with was a recommendation to continue with a fairly conservative approach, sort of paying as we go, not getting out ahead of ourselves in terms of revenues that we anticipate actually having in the bank when we would be preparing to construct improvements. We are continuing to work with the developer on Kaiser Road. The recommendation for the budget, and is reflected in the numbers that Sheila just showed us, was funding, allocating $8.7 million that would be used to construct what we call Springville Phase 4. That's sort of the last remaining unimproved segment between the PCC campus entrance and Joss Avenue. And then an additional $2.1 million that would be allocated for interim pedestrian safety improvements on Kaiser Road. And that's intended so that if for some reason the work with our development partner doesn't move forward or is going to be delayed again, we want to be able to get some interim safety improvements out there. Our committee members shared with us that there have been people out starting to walk on one of the stretches of Kaiser Road that doesn't have any shoulders or sidewalks. So allocating some funds that will help us to help complete some of those gaps, at least on an interim basis. And so a total of about $10.8 million is what we're allocating in total. And I think with that, I'll wrap it up. And thank you all for your time. And
if you advance to the next slide, you can see
yes.
those proposals in a pictorial form.
Yes. Thank you, Chair.
All right, if we go to the next slide. So we didn't leave you guys very much questions and discussion time. Our budget committee meeting as a theme has been running a little bit longer than the last year's experience. So we will try to do better with time management next time and the time allocation next time. So I want to say, is there any questions or discussions from the budget committee in regards to this year's budget?
Commissioner Rogers has his hand up.
Thank you. Stephen, and this is not for tonight because it would take too long a discussion, but I'd be personally interested. When we set up that service district, there was I guess a bunch of revenue coming from different sources. We cobbled together, as we would say, 4, if not 5 sources of revenue. The appetite for improvements in the area has exceeded, I think, the monies that are available. I sincerely question the sustainability of doing all of the projects with not only the TDT, which is not significant enough to do everything, as you know, with the SDCs, which again are going to be compressed. And looking at simply the tax rate revenue is not going to work. So what does this mean to other districts in the county is that we're going to have to take a look at what we backfill in terms of MSTIP money. And with that being oversubscribed by a whole lot of money, I just question how all of this is going to be done in the future without either one, raising the taxes in that area, if that's what the desire is, or taking a look and saying how you minimize the project list. So that's my elongated comment and question, and you can certainly take that offline, because I think it's more than this. There's nothing in this budget needs to be adjusted or changed, but it's a policy issue. What's going to happen in the future, not what this is, because this is certainly only a little capsule of time, a very short look at what's happening. So anyway, give me some information at some point.
We can do that.
All right, any other questions or discussion points? Okay, so we do have a deliberation time at the next budget committee's public hearing as well. So if we can advance to the next slide. So the budget committee public hearing is scheduled this year for May 26, 2021. And that starts at 5:30 p.m. and then ends at 6:20 p.m. That is public testimony is scheduled at 5:50 time certain. So we will have time before and after the public comment periods for any questions or deliberations. And in the meantime, if you have any questions or comments or information request for this set of budget, please email that to the finance_budget@sco.washington.or.us. And that is, we will channel that to Steven's team as well, but that is basically our way of keeping a record of all of the questions that's coming in and then publish that on our website. And then we have a Board of County Commissioners adoption for the budget, which is scheduled for June 15th, 2021. And this is at the 10 a.m. board regular meeting on that day. And public testimony will again be available on that day, and then that will be before the adoption of the budget. So any questions about the next step? All right, next slide, please. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining in on tonight's budget committee meeting. Thank you very much for being a part of this committee, and we will see you on the 26th. So I'll hand it over back to Chair Beachy to adjourn the meeting.
Thank you all for joining us. I understand that you do have another meeting. I did have a few questions written down, and I would ask that, but I understand that the time constraints with having another meeting. I would ask that if anybody, if you do get submittals from our community members or our county commissioners, that be shared with the full budget committee so that we have those, that we also are included on those answers. Commissioner Rogers' question gets to some of my questions as far as our long-term sustainability, even within North Bethany, and what these funds mean as these revenues decrease as we have filled in the area here. So that does actually speak to some of my questions. And I actually did want to follow up with Latricia on any the diversity and inclusion questions, and if there's been any studies as far as any analyzations of what we're doing here in North Bethany and how it's affecting minority communities or disproportionately affecting other communities. So, I mean, I think that's a good long-term perspective for all of us to have, especially as community members. So I will share those with everyone and hopefully just make sure that we all get back any answers that we get from the county, that they're all shared together. I would request that. If anybody else have any further questions or comments?
Chair Beachy, I just want to share that we will also be posting the questions and answers on the website, so it's publicly available, so community members can also access that.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay. And welcome our new county administrator. Sorry, I did not say hi. I have not met you in person yet. So welcome. I was glad to informally meet you here. Okay. if we're all good, we will let you all get to your next meeting, and our meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you. We county commissioners need to stay in this Zoom for our next meeting.
No dinner for you. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, we did had a scheduled intermission at this point. Maybe we can explain to the committee members that joins in that would the commissioners like to take 5 minutes or shall we just go ahead? All right, I'm seeing some head shaking, so we'll just go ahead. And I would turn to Clerk Moss to see if we have the next committee members in yet.
I will go through the attendees list and move them over for you, Jack.
Thank you, Clerk Moss.
Jack, can I get a quick sound check? Can you hear me?
A little quiet on your side, John. I can hear you.
Okay, is that better?
It's slightly better, although it's still very quiet.
Okay.
Hi, this is Melissa.
Hi, Melissa.
You can hear me fine?
Yep, we can hear you okay. Let's see, we got Steven, Raymond, Melissa. Let's see, we got Anthony. We are missing Daniel Hauser. I know Daniel mentioned to me, communicated with me in email that it's actually his birthday today. So he may be, depending on the timing, he may be coming in a little bit later or leaving a little bit early. So by him not here yet, I'm guessing that he may come in a little bit later. So. All right, so we have 4 or 5 community members, all 5 commissioners, and then we have John in already. We I want to see if Clerk Moss can check if the sheriff is present in the attendees list. Sheriff Garrett.
Yes, we have the sheriff for you, Jack.
Oh, thank you very much. All right, well, we'll get started. Welcome, everyone. This is the ESPD, which stands for Enhanced Sheriff's Patrol District, Urban Road Maintenance District Budget Committee. This is 2 sets of budget, 2 separate districts combined in 1 budget committee. And this is for fiscal year 2021-22. Next slide, please. And next, I will hand it over to County Administrator Tanya Angie to do her welcome remarks.
Thank you, Jack, and it's great to be with everyone tonight. Thank you for volunteering, community members, and spending time on this wonderful spring evening. My name is Tanya Angie, and I'm the County Administrator, and I started with Washington County in August of 2020. It feels like such a short time ago, and yet still such a long time ago, given the COVID time warp, as I will call that. So at this point, next slide. We will be moving into introductions. So at this time, I would pass it over to Chair Harrington to lead introductions of the commissioners.
Good evening to our colleagues on the ESPD and URMD Budget Committee. I'm Catherine Harrington, the chair of your Washington County Commission, and my 4 colleagues are here with us tonight. So we'll go through introductions in reverse order of our districts for a change. So over to you, Commissioner Willie.
Thank you, Chair Jerry Willie, District 4 Commissioner. And I will forward it on to Roy Rogers, District 3.
Well, thank you, Jerry. I'm Roy Rogers, District 3, and that's in the southeastern quadrant of the county, mainly cities, and represent about 7, 8 if you throw in a couple of little things that come across the Clackamas County border. So I guess I'll go to Commissioner 2, Pam Treese.
Thank you, Commissioner Rogers. I'm Pam Treese. I'm Commissioner for District 2, and I would like to turn it over to Commissioner Fye.
Thank you, Commissioner Treese. Hello, everyone. My name is Nafisa Fye, Commissioner for District 1. Good to see you all. I think I see a lot of people, but I turn it back to you, Chair Harrington.
Well, thank you. Each of the commissioners has a little bit of urban unincorporated Washington County in their district to varying degrees. The majority of it happens to be in District 1 and District 2, but there is a UUA area in District 3, such as the Garden Home Metzger area. And there is a teeny tiny bit in District 4. So all 5 of us have constituents who are covered by these 2 service districts. So at this juncture, we'll turn it over for our community member introductions. I know for some of you, this is a multiple year of your serving on these budget commissions. So I'm going to turn it over to Melissa Laird at this point. Oops, you're on mute.
Sorry. Hi, everybody. My name is Melissa Laird, and I'll turn it over to Raymond Eck.
Yes, my name is Raymond Eck, and I'm in District number 1. And I'll turn it over to Stephen Barron.
I'm Stephen Barron, and in one of those unincorporated areas in the 1st District.
So,
how about Daniel Hauser next?
Hello, everyone. Daniel Hauser. Happy to be returning for another tour of duty on this fun budget committee. I apologize that my son had to leave. I know that he would be a much more engaging member than I. And I did manage to make it on time, Jack. I heard you sharing that I might be late. I accidentally logged in on my work account, so you probably saw 4 random letters and not Daniel Hauser. So even though it is on my birthday, I am thoroughly thankful to be able to be a part of this again. And I might be off camera a little bit more than usual, but know that I remain here and engaged. Thank you. And I don't know who else didn't go because I had to jump away for a minute, so I apologize.
We'll pop over to Anthony Mills.
Okay, thank you, and happy birthday, Daniel. I'm Anthony Mills. I live in Loa in District 1, and I think this is the 4th or 5th year that I've been on this budget committee. So thank you.
And I also want to thank those of you who were able to join us for this year's budget committee orientation. I really appreciated your joining us for that. Okay, Jack, we'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, Chair Harrington, next slide, please. So we'll quickly go over today's agenda. We already done the welcome and introduction part. So there are 2 committee actions that your committee will be making today. And one is, oh, actually, let's dial back 1 slide. I forgot to introduce the presentations staff. I just realized that. My name is Jack Liang, Washington County CFO. I'll turn it over to Latricia Tillman.
Jack, let's come back to Latricia. It seems like she's having troubles with her mute. Let's go to Sheriff Garrett.
Good evening, everybody. Good to be with you. Sheriff Pat Garrett here.
Thank you, Sheriff. How about Under Sheriff John Coach?
Good evening, Under Sheriff John Cook with the Sheriff's Office.
Thank you, John. And then we'll circle back to Latricia.
And I'm unmuted now. Thank you very much for giving me a little reprieve. And yeah, I feel very welcome to the club. I'm Latricia Tillman. I'm the Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer for Washington County.
Thank you, Latricia. We do have also staff from the URMD that will be presenting later at a later part of this meeting. So we will introduce them when they come on. Next slide, please. All right, so we have two committee actions. That's under number 2 over here. One is to elect a committee chair, and then 2 is to review and adopt the public hearing procedures. And then we'll go into the general information where Tanya will cover the county-wide budget major themes for this year. Latricia will cover the equity, diversity, and inclusion in the budget process and the plan. And then we'll go over quickly for the public's benefit of the service districts at Washington County before we jump into the fiscal year 2021-22 ESPD budget presentation, as well as the URMD budget presentation. Then we'll talk about next steps, and then we'll adjourn the meeting. Next slide, please. So since we don't have a committee chair, if I may help facilitate this part of the process, is there any nominations for the committee chair for this next year?
I'd like to nominate Anthony Mills if he'll accept.
All right.
Thank you. I've been the chair for a number of years, and I chair other boards, but my internet service is terrible where I'm at, and I'm surprised that it hasn't cut out now. So I think that for the benefit of everyone else, I would defer this year while we're on Zoom. I know that Stephen Barron took my place as chair on the Park and Rec board, and I think that he does a great job. I would nominate him. Or certainly anybody else that has any interest in doing it.
I'll second the nomination.
I'll third it.
Daniel. All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any objections? Opposed? None. All right. Well, the motion passes, and Steve Barron is chair for the ESPD and URMD budget committee.
All right.
All right. So Stephen, the next committee action is to review and adopt of the budget committee procedures. And this is a procedure that's specifically set for the public hearing process that's at the May 26th meeting. So hopefully everyone had a chance to review the procedure. It kind of goes over the steps, both for reviewing and deliberation of the budget, as well as offering a public testimony process at the meeting. Does anyone have any questions or discussions? All right, I'll turn to you, Chair Barron, to facilitate a motion to adopt the budget hearing procedures.
All right. Do I hear a motion to adopt the procedures as presented?
Daniel Hauser.
Anthony, so moved.
Will happily second the motion.
All right. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposition? Anybody abstain? No? Okay, motion passes for the adoption of the committee procedures.
Thank you, Chair Barron. Next slide, please. All right, now I'll turn it over to County Administrator Tanya Angie to go over this year's major themes in the fiscal year 21-22 budget season.
Thank you, Jack. Good evening, Chair Barron and Budget Committee members. I'm going to keep my comments brief because we have rich material to walk through this evening. A full set of my comments is actually available on the YouTube video on Washington County's YouTube site from Thursday, May 13th, which is from the Washington County and Service District Number 1 Budget Committee meeting, if it's of interest. This is Washington County's second proposed budget delivered during the COVID pandemic. As a community, we have multiple crises happening at once, including public health, economic, housing, racial disparities, and severe events such as wildfires, snow, and ice storms. I want to pause and recognize my colleagues and point out the heroic work of county employees through it all. We are still in response mode, and I am here to share we have servant leaders at all levels of our Washington County organization. Related to the pandemic, we remain at high risk, but cases and hospitalizations are beginning to level off. This gives us hope. The spread of the virus and shutdown activity disproportionately affected the Latinx community, both in terms of health and economic impact. This is an area that needs ongoing attention and investment. On the bright side, the side of hope, Governor Brown is shifting the focus from case levels to vaccination rates when it comes to what level of public health restrictions must be in place. We are closing in on the governor's target of 70% for significant reopening. This gives us hope. Relative to economic recovery, we're still climbing out of the job deficit caused by the pandemic. This is especially the case in our leisure and hospitality industry. Again, disproportionately impacted, which has disproportionately impacted our Latinx community. As Joe Topanga of Eco Northwest pointed out in his presentation to the board a couple weeks ago, many economists expect a full recovery by late 2023. This is much faster than originally predicted. This gives us hope. However, caution. Economic recoveries frequently leave some behind, underscoring the need to continue to focus on racial equity. Relative to our financial picture, there is deep information included in the budget summary. And due to brevity, I will not go into that any further, except I do want to highlight, we have been recipients this last year of federal aid. This has been one-time federal aid. This originally last year in 2020 came in the form of CARES Act, which was $104.6 million. The county successfully dispersed these dollars, put it into immediate action within our community. A full report on the use of the $104.6 million can be accessed on the county's website, and it's called Lift Us Up, Keep Us Going. We are waiting receipt of additional funds through the American Rescue Plan. These funds can be used through 2024, and that is in the amount of $116 million. As we are still in response mode, and we know there's significant recovery needs at hand, the Board of County Commissioners is taking a very thoughtful approach of how do we plan for these dollars. I do want to just briefly touch on the priorities that are found throughout the Washington County budget. And this goes beyond pandemic response and recovery. Latricia Tillman, our Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer, is here this evening. And we've been focused on the equity resolution since February of 2020 when board adopted it. The Office of Equity and Inclusion is already meeting several of the key milestones included in the resolution, including advisory bodies, both internal and soon to be established external. And in a moment, Latricia will provide a brief overview of what to expect in the future when equity is part of the budget process. And I do believe that Daniel Hauser actually inquired about this at our budget orientation session. A few of the other budget priorities that you'll see in the budget include housing affordability, economic development, transportation, public safety, and capital investments. In conclusion, I want to underscore a final thought for each of you this evening. As I stated in the beginning, the 2,300 plus employees of this organization have risen to the occasion for our community in ways that no one could have ever predicted. I am grateful for their diligence, commitment, and perseverance each and every day. So thank you to my fellow colleagues. And with that, I'll turn it over to Latricia Tillman.
Thank you, Ms. Angie. Again, I'm Latricia Tillman, Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer, and I wanted to speak with you this evening about where we are in terms of building equity into our budget process. So as Ms. Angie mentioned, we are past the 1-year anniversary of the board's adoption of the equity resolution. And I began work at Washington County in September of 2020. And so we're now 8 months into really strengthening and building our equity foundation. And it's still my first time around the sun with Washington County, still learning how everything works in our first cycle through our budget process. So the considerations that I'm going to share with you tonight are really about how we move forward together from here, building equity into our budget process going forward. So what I'd like to start with is equity in our budget process relies on data-driven decision-making, transparency, and community engagement. And what that means is we need to use data to understand what racial inequities exist. And I know that the Sheriff's Office is very familiar with this, but oftentimes we see data that presents a countywide picture, and that may mask inequities. So we need to be able to understand our data disaggregated by race and ethnicity. That helps us know which populations are having a different experience more vulnerability, and maybe worse outcomes. And then we need to identify in our budget process which inequities are we intending to address through our targeted investments. The data that helps us with those decisions also helps us know how we're doing and helps us identify which metrics to track so that we can make sure that we're making progress, the progress that we intend. Equity also requires us to be transparent in how we are allocating our dollars. And that includes sharing publicly the processes that we are using to make those decisions, as well as who's involved in shaping and implementing that process. So that requires early and frequent communication about our expectations for advancing equity throughout the budget process, including identifying or creating specific line items to help demonstrate how we are intentionally investing in fundamental elements of equity. And that could mean specific line items that call out our investments around interpretation, translation, the amount of bilingual staff that we have. Third, community engagement is essential to equity, obviously, to make sure that we are learning and hearing from a diversity of county voices. And our chair talks about centering community need. And so we need to make sure that when we are centering community need, we're hearing from all of the community. So last fall, we had 3 community investment conversations, which were great. And moving forward, we want to look at how to expand opportunities for community engagement, including diversifying our budget committees, as well as making sure that there's ongoing engagement opportunities for a diverse community. The intent of using an equity lens in our budget is to make sure that we have and can assure equitable access to county services, equitable quality of those services, and equitable outcomes. So from an access perspective, we're looking at do all of Washington County residents, are they able to access Washington County services that they're entitled to? And again, we look to the data disaggregated by race, ethnicity, and language to see, are the people that we're serving, does that actually match the need that we know exists in the community? And then how are we investing in eliminating those barriers to access? From a quality perspective, we want to know and attend to how our service delivery is meeting the unique cultural norms, values, and social positioning of diverse communities. So this acknowledges that a one-size-fits-all approach to policy and programs doesn't actually work well for all communities. And we want to know whether or not our investments are also transforming the environments that create and sustain inequity. So as I've mentioned before, I just recently learned of a quote from Henry David Thoreau that says, "For every 1,000 hacking at the leaves of evil, there is one striking at the root." And for us, adopting a quality perspective, maybe even a prevention perspective, we want to make sure our investments are striking at the root of the problems that create need for our county services. From an outcomes focus, again, our investments are intended to create a return in the community in terms of community health and well-being and safety. And we want to make sure that when we're looking at those outcomes disaggregated by race and ethnicity, that each community that is paying their taxes and investing in Washington County and entitled to the services that Washington County delivers is seeing an equitable return on their investment in services. And that we look to our data, again, back up to the top of the list, we look to our data and to the engagement and community wisdom of our communities to know that when we see outcomes as a result of the budget investments, that those outcomes are showing up equitably across all of our communities. So that's really just a high level overview of how we expect to start looking at how we can build equity into our budget process going forward. Back to you, Jack.
Thank you, Latricia. Next slide, please. Now, for the benefit of the public, we'll just quickly go over the service districts at Washington County. Washington County, in addition to the general government, we have 4 service districts. The Enhanced Sheriff's Patrol District, which stands for ESPD, Urban Road Maintenance District, URMD, North Bethany County Service District for roads, and then also the Service District for Lighting number 1. For this budget committee's purpose, we'll be going over the Enhanced Sheriff's Patrol District as well as the Urban Road Maintenance District. Now, for the benefit of the budget committee as well as the public, the ESPD budget this year is on the proposed budget summary page 304 to 305. And then for URMD, it's on proposed budget summary page 306 to 307. Next slide, please. Now I will hand it over to Washington County Sheriff Pat Garrett to provide an overview on ESPD.
Slide, please. Joining me tonight, in addition to Under Sheriff Cook, is our Business Services Manager, John Steyer, and we thank Committee Chair Barron and all the committee members for your commitment and attention to detail as you sit through a number of committee presentations. We greatly appreciate your work in this critical part of county government. The Enhanced Sheriff's Patrol District was created in 1987 at the conclusion of a report by the Public Safety Review Committee. That report was actually published in 1986. I'm just a year ahead of myself on the second bullet on the left side. The committee had 17 members. They met 13 times. Among the recommendations, they concluded that it was, quote, desirable, unquote, that every county resident have police services available at a minimum of 1 officer per 1,000. Now, as you know, that minimum recommended standard was limited to the urban unincorporated area, which essentially defines the Enhanced Sheriff's Patrol District. And I think over 30 years of experience providing public safety services to the district has demonstrated that about 1 officer per 1,000 has been an effective minimum service level when you consider crime rates, response times, community support, or ability to sustain relationships with community members and community groups. Slide, please. Chair Harrington pointed it out so very well. Each commissioner district has a slice of the Enhanced Sheriff's Patrol District. In the case of Commissioner Willie, it's really just adjacent to a couple of cities, which highlights the flexibility of the district. When a city annexes part of the district, it automatically transfers services from the district, the sheriff's office, to the city, and those district taxes are done away with for that resident, and the city taxes are paid. So it contracts for annexation, and when population grows, it can also expand as well when it comes to staffing and service levels. Slide, please. This slide depicts just how ESPD residents get to that 1 officer per 1,000. The graph on this slide depicts service levels across the entire unincorporated area on the right side of the 2 bar graphs by major fund, and distinguishes that level of service in the rural area with the level of service in ESPD on the left, or the urban unincorporated area. In each case, starting at the bottom, The general fund service level is about 0.36 officers per thousand and has been in place since about the year 2000 when the public safety local option levy was first passed. That gets us to the next level above that middle level, 0.18 officers per thousand. That's the service level supported by the public safety local option levy, which has been in existence for just over 20 years. And then if you continue to move up on the left side for district residents through an ESPD local option levy, residents have voted to support for over 30 years district residents authorized funding at an additional level of about 0.5 officer per thousand. And that's how the district residents get to a total of 1 officer per thousand, an urban service level for urban residents. Slide, please. So ESPD funding, what does it provide? It provides immediate response to investigation of major crimes like homicide, assault, burglary, domestic violence, crimes against children, elder abuse. Importantly, ESPD funding also provides investigation of property crimes and other crimes like theft, stolen vehicles, fraud, vandalism, other crimes that impact community safety and quality of life. ESPD funding provides training in crisis, intervention, de-escalation, among a myriad of other knowledge, skills, and abilities to do this work, and as well as traffic enforcement. Traffic safety and traffic enforcement continues to be a community top-tier concern wherever we go, whether it's face-to-face or in the virtual world, and that is a part of what ESPD funds. When it comes to funding, it's important to recognize that public budgeting is super important to our community members. We know that. All of us on this at this meeting know that. And it's important that we don't spend everything that this committee authorizes us to spend. And in coordination with the county, we share the goal to not spend what we don't need to spend. And in recent budget years, we have returned 1% of authorized budgeted dollars back to Fund 210, back to that parent, that master ESPD fund that the county manages. In fiscal year 18-19, we returned 7% of funds back to that master organizational unit. That's just over $2 million. In fiscal year 19-20, that was 8%, about $2.3 million. And this fiscal year, we're on track to return just over 6%. Slide, please. Under Sheriff Cook.
Thank you, Sheriff. These next couple slides talk about crime rates in the Enhanced Sheriff's Patrol District. The data is from the FBI's NIBR system, which is the National Incident-Based Reporting System where law enforcement agencies send their data for tracking. This first slide talks about the person crimes rates. It tracks violent crimes against people, mainly assaults, homicides, kidnapping, and a few others. Washington County overall is a very safe place to live and raise our families. On a list of Oregon's top 20 safest cities, several Washington County cities are in that top 20. These cities include Forest Grove, Sherwood, Beaverton, and Hillsborough. It should be noted that Beaverton and Hillsborough are two of the larger cities on that list. However, when we look at unincorporated Washington County crime statistics, we must first of all realize that these are all of unincorporated Washington County. Even though we're talking about ESPD, that is really about 85% of our population for our unincorporated areas. And it also makes up about 85% of our calls for service. But as you can see by this graph, Oregon has a lower overall person crime rate than the national average. And compared to our larger municipal partners, we are lower than even the state's average here in unincorporated Washington County. Next slide. This next slide shows the NIBR's property crimes rates. These rates include robbery, burglary, theft, and several other categories. Again, our unincorporated property crime rates are again beneath the US and state averages. This is just more evidence of why Washington County is Oregon's safest major urban county. This is definitely one list that we're happy to be on the bottom of. Next slide.
Thank you, John. Here we provide a brief overview of our budget request for our entire office in the top right corner of the slide. And this chart shows funding, well, actually, and on the left, that circle graph on your left as well. The chart shows funding for a proposed FY 21-22 budget as distributed among various functional areas like patrol, jail, investigations, services, and other. Other indicates Sheriff's Office admin, business support services, law enforcement technology, and public affairs. And it has a breakout of patrol funding and where you will find the ESPD budget in the center of your slide. The Sheriff's Office budget encompasses 8 funds. The 3 largest funds are General Fund, District Patrol, or ESPD, and the Public Safety Local Option Levy. Smaller funds include contract services, court security, that's entrance security at the courthouse, grants and donations, jail commissary, and forfeitures. All these funds make up the Sheriff's Office total request of $134.6 million. This represents a 1% increase from the current fiscal year. You can also see at the right our ESPD budget request bottom line. This request is essentially flat when compared to our budget from the current fiscal year. It's actually 0.1% higher than the current fiscal year, or about $45,000, right in there. Very, 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 very flat. Of all of our funds, about 45% or $58 million supports patrol operations and serve about 265,000 residents in the unincorporated area. In the center of the slide, you can see the breakout between our 3 funds that support patrol operations. ESPD is the largest portion of the patrol budget. Next, we'll drill into what makes up the ESPD budget request for fiscal year 21-22. Next slide, please. This chart depicts our budget request for ESPD across the different cost areas. Personal services, materials and supplies, interdepartmental or county overhead, and then the other category, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. The total request is on the right, and the difference between this request and last year's request are compared down the kind of the bottom right portion of the slide. And just to be clear, on page 98 of your budget book, the fund title for ESPD operating funds, or Fund 182, is District Patrol. That's what this budget is reflected, this budget request is reflected in that, on that page. You may also refer to page 304 as Jack indicated earlier, that's Fund 210. That's the organizational unit that houses the property tax revenues for the district. It's managed by the county and disperses funds for ESPD operations into Fund 182, which is what we're looking at here. Our ESPD budget request this upcoming fiscal year, which you are deliberating, is $33.5 million to serve about 237,000 ESPD residents. 73% of our budget covers personnel costs, and then the others, as you work your way around that graph, are laid out in front of you. I just want to kind of work down the right side of the changes to FY 21-22 when compared to this current fiscal year. So the personnel budget represents a 7% increase to support 151.6 full-time employees. 130 of them are certified police officers. This budget keeps existing staffing levels and includes increased costs for PERS along with wages and benefits. Materials and supplies show a 2% decrease compared to the current fiscal year, while supporting needs to include training, service contracts, duty gear, defensive tools, other supplies, and fleet costs for operations and maintenance. Interdepartmental, that increase is 8%. Costs are set by the county cost allocation plan and includes, for this upcoming fiscal year, several IT projects, some miscellaneous hardware and software needs. Transfers out, that's a decrease of 67%, pretty small dollars in the big picture, but includes a facilities project for Bethany. And then lastly, capital outlay down 97%, owing to the fact that we only have one vehicle procurement to replace an aged out vehicle. And last year, you'll probably remember, we had a large number of vehicle replacements and several new vehicles into that budget. Slide, please. Under Sheriff Cook.
Sheriff's Office, we have a strong history of innovation and improvement. We're always focused on learning and growing as an organization. Part of this has to do with our scenario-based training, which helps us improve communication and coordination with an emphasis on de-escalation, which is so important these days. These skills help bring stability to rapidly evolving and potentially dangerous incidents. We also seek out improvement in all forms from our community and from seeking advice from national experts. This year, we brought in a company called Polis to do an independent review of our use of force. They're looking at our entire process and going to be providing us feedback on areas that we can improve and areas that we're doing well and should maintain. That information will be public later this summer. When it comes to providing proactive service, much of how we change as an organization focuses on our strong policies and procedures. Our policies and procedures continue to be responsive to the community and are constantly evolving. Some examples of that are body-worn cameras. We just are in the process of deploying those out across our patrol division. This will help us improve our scenario-based training by learning what deputies are experiencing in the community. It will also protect our deputies while providing the transparency that our community expects of us. We've implemented policy updates to require de-escalation techniques when feasible and safe. This is reinforced by ongoing training focused on de-escalation in all of our physical skills training. We also updated policies on banning neck restraints unless lethal force is authorized. This was an internal decision we made prior to any legislative changes, which was in line with our internal decision. We've also implemented training updates for taking enforcement action when probable cause exists for bias-based crimes. Next slide, please. Part of what drives our adaptive policing is our connection to the community. We're proud of the service and we strive to constantly evolve. This is in part due to our ESPD levy. We constantly engage with the community to ensure that we're listening to their concerns so we can continue to provide the best public safety. We evolve to ensure that the ESPD communities are receiving the service that they want. One of the examples of these emerging needs are the fentanyl and opioid issues. Our deputies have adapted their investigative focus to prioritize their investigations to those who are providing deadly drugs to our kids and those suffering from addiction. We've also been working with community partners to help educate the public on the hazards of these dangerous and often deadly substances. We also provide the community several areas and venues to give us feedback where they can give us compliments and complaints. Each year, we receive more compliments than we do complaints. Another area we've been engaging with our diverse Washington County community is through the Building Bridges Summit. For the last 5 years, we've met with this diverse team hosted through the Muslim Educational Trust to build bridges. This partnership helps us find ways to foster communication and trust, recognizing we're all part of the same community. We're also adaptive in meeting and exceeding accreditation standards. These national and international standards continuously change to keep up with law enforcement best practices. The Sheriff's Office has created a Latino Advisor Commission. Through partnerships with community leaders, we're working to better understand community priorities related to our training and our policies. We continue to improve our internal review process on all use of force incidents. We've added 2 community members to our Survival Skills Council, which reviews all of our use of force incidents, so we get that community lens. Next slide.
Thank you, John. Our staff this past year innovated in some really creative ways to stay engaged with our community during COVID. And just a few examples. Kids Safety Academy, we conducted 2 virtual academies, one this past summer, one this spring, 144 total computer IP addresses tuning in, and many of those had multiple kiddos in attendance. Like had a community academy spring of this year with 64 tuning in. We had a 3-day career fair with Western Oregon University criminal justice students. 98 tuned into that, and we had terrific feedback. That continues to be a really rich recruiting community. We conducted 9 virtual neighborhood watch presentations and another 16 virtual presentations across a range of crime prevention topics for our senior citizens and our kids' online safety and other groups. And while the virtual world provided really interesting opportunities, and we could reach more people that way. We do look forward, as do you, to being able to return to in-person events this later this year. And we engage in other ways as well. We have leaders at our organization that teach at Portland Community College. Our members of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives serve on the board for the Vision Action Network and the Family Justice Center. And then again, we partner closely with the Criminal Justice Department at Western Oregon University. Slide, please. As I close out, I just want to, let's see. Well, maybe go back one. I just want to close out by mentioning recruiting and then just a couple of closing thoughts. We transitioned our recruiting effort, like so many of you in your world, all online last year. We hosted several virtual online events. Honestly, some were well attended, some not so well attended, as we kind of learned our way through that. Those who were really well attended, Western Oregon tops the list. Camp Pendleton career fairs top the list for outgoing Marines, which is a surprising, maybe not surprising, it is a diverse community at Camp Pendleton. And then we had virtual question and answer sessions each hiring cycle so that those who were in the application process could have the best chance of being successful through that process. And then once they got onboarded for our in-house academy, where we kind of set them off on the right foot in their new career, we maintained a recruiting focus to include our Black, Indigenous, people of color community members. As the community relaxes its kind of limitations with COVID, recruiting possibilities will also expand, enable us to get back to events in the metro area like career fairs that specifically support our communities of color, our LGBTQ plus community and women. And just so, just as an interesting data point, this has come up in this committee before. In 2019, 1 in 5 of our new deputies identified as a person of color. In 2020, that was 1 in 4. Couple of initiatives or areas where we are planning in the near term. Beaverton Pride returns to an in-person event this summer, and we're planning to have a recruiting effort there. And then we recently have been corresponding with a National Minority Update. It's a really well-organized website that advertises as America's #1 resource for diversity in employment and education. And we're going to be advertising and recruiting on their section for public safety and fire. This budget request continues to support 1 officer per 1,000, that minimum effective service level. I think that's really, really important. I can't overstate how important it is for us to be able to respond to 9/11 calls in a really in a timely manner, to investigate major crimes. We don't have to look far to see the surge in serious crime when a community loses faith in their public safety system, to have the capacity to be responsive to those really urgent crimes. And in addition, to have the flexibility to support our community in other ways, like last Thursday, when our friends at the Bilal Mosque in Loa asked us to just come by for Eid. The Eid morning prayers, super important. They feel safer when we're there. We love to be there, and we're able to do that to support a range of community members when we have the capacity that we have at 1 officer per 1,000. And going forward, we're just going to continue to explore those partnerships and others, like with our terrific partners at HHS on the health side, with our housing partners, to help connect people to services. We're in the background when we need to be, and when they need us to be a little farther forward, then we're going to do that and be hand in hand with those important parts of supporting our community. And then we're just also going to be continually focused on restorative justice partnerships that we have with our entire justice system through specialty courts, so that we can just continue to be focused and innovative and be able to support our entire community. And with that, we'd love to answer your questions.
I have a question, and forgive me because this is only my second year, but when we're talking about equity, how do the demographics of the ESPD compare to the rest of the county? And I know you talked about having that one deputy per 1,000 residents. So how does that compare to like some of the other cities? I know you put out that it's like about a deputy for each 1,000 in the rural area, but how does that compare to some of the other districts around like Beaverton or Hillsborough?
Thank you, Chair Barron. I'll take that question first. The officer per 1,000 for our municipal partners like Beaverton and Hillsborough, they're about 1.4, 1.3. So they're sitting at a level that's just a little bit higher than what you find in ESPD. However, we do have a bit of the economies of scale that I think help make the services that are provided in ESPD, that they're valuable, right? It's public safety value when you consider the cost effectiveness of those services. So we are staffed just a little bit less than cities. We don't have a true urban core that cities do. So it's not truly apples to apples. It's similar. With respect to your first question about the community, I don't have demographic breakdowns for the district. I do know though that we are easily the most ethnically and racially diverse county in the state. Chair Harrington speaks very eloquently about that. And so that's our assumption going forward. That's the community that we serve, is a very diverse community.
I think Daniel had the next question, then Commissioner Harrington, and then Commissioner Rogers.
Privileged to jump in front of those two wonderful people. But my question hopefully will not be too particularly difficult. I'm curious, are you able to share any information about stop or search rates by race and ethnicity in the URMD area for the Washington County Sheriff's Office?
Yeah, so what I recommend is that we send you the link to the state's statistical transparency of policing data. And what that data shows for the last year is that our traffic stops were equitable across the two communities of color that were their population sample size was strong enough to analyze. And that is our Latino community drivers and our Black drivers. The Criminal Justice Commission, who analyzes that data, reported that our stops are equitable. Our post-stop outcomes, however, for our Latino drivers are just a little higher than what's in the equitable zone. That is something that we are continuing to be focused on. I think there are some socioeconomic drivers that are involved in that statistic, but there's really, really rich data at that website for us and every law enforcement agency in this county on that front.
Thank you, Sheriff Garrett. I look forward to seeing that.
Well, I think, yeah, Commissioner Harrington.
Thank you. Last year, through the budget process, I learned a lot through community feedback, where a percent change of a line item from one budget year to the next budget year was misinterpreted as a budget increase versus a change, which really sensitized me to some of the phraseology that we use in our budget document, but also in our presentations. So I say that because I have a question and I'm just trying to make sure that I understand it clearly. So when I look at page 304, you talk about the permanent rate, because after all, the Enhanced Sheriff Patrol District was set up in 1987, right? But it became a permanent rate by virtue of that whole combination of Measure 5, 47, and 50. So that permanent rate is that portion of general fund property taxes that is maintained at that level year over year over year. And then on top of that is the levy, which only the urban unincorporated folks pay through that voter approved levy, and the rural folks don't contribute to that. Correct?
I think you said it well, Chair Harrington. What I want to run to ground and make sure that I have this correct and I get good feedback to you is if a part of the district is annexed by a city, I think the permanent rate goes away. But okay, I see Commissioner Rogers shaking his head in the affirmative. So, right, there is a permanent rate and a levy rate, just as you described, Chair Harrington, and those are paid by district members. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, where this is really going is on slide 48, which is a really effective chart. We just say general fund, right? And what I'm learning is it's that general fund permanent rate.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
It isn't a subsidy from the remainder of general fund discretionary revenues. And I say this because it's very important that we continue to honor that permanent rate. And I don't want people to think that, oh, we should just cut that line item because it's general fund discretionary use. It's not. It's from that permanent rate. So I've already written permanent rate right next to that because it's that general fund permanent rate money.
Thank you for the clarification.
And the follow on to this, and I'll type it up for you, Jack, is in looking at the multiple budget documents, I wonder how might the public see what portion of that is permanent rate revenue versus levy revenue. So, but I'll put that in a written form. So thank you very much for listening to my questions tonight. Good job.
Thank you. Commissioner Rogers?
Sure, I'll jump in. As you know, I've always supported this particular levy, and I continue to. It's an important part of patrol in the urban unincorporated area. But you lost me a little bit on a comment that you made. In '87, what we did is we set up this mechanism, as I'll call it, to provide enhanced sheriff patrol in an area that was not getting the level of service that we thought might be necessary because of our strategic plan, which provided a very thin number of officers. There was no anticipation that there would be any transfers to any other funds, that this fund was self-contained. And I think maybe I either misunderstood you, or I didn't really catch what you were saying, but you kept talking about turning back money to another fund. And if that's the case, then why are we levying it? As an urban unincorporated payer of this, I'm concerned about that comment. So help me understand what you were trying to say.
Oh, you bet, Commissioner. I'm trying to convey that we are frugal, that our strategic goal, which says that we are to be good stewards of the tax dollar, is what we're doing. At the end of each fiscal year, in coordination with the county administrator's office, we do return a percentage of our budget back to Fund 210. We don't spend every dime that we get authorized. That's really the point that I was trying to make.
Pat, I'm hearing you, but 210 is the general budget for your department, as I recall, and the numbers. Why would I? I'm being a little argumentative, but why would I, as an urban unincorporated person paying these taxes, want you to turn it back at all? I mean, we're paying this levy because we want an enhanced sheriff presence, and you're saying, and I give you an A+ for being frugal, as I always have. But I appreciate that. But why am I paying taxes that's getting turned over somewhere else? I fail to understand that.
Commissioner Rogers, Sheriff Garrett, if I may just chime in on that real quick. So when Sheriff Garrett mentioned Fund 210, it is actually the ESPD fund where the tax is collected. So it's not first of all, it's not transferring to another fund. And then what Sheriff Garrett is trying to explain is that we build a budget with the best intention and the best plan possible, and then sheriff's office actually stay very, very prudent when it comes to executing that budget. It actually does under execute from one year to another to save cost. Back to the ESPD. Now, your point is very well taken, is that, if we're turning back money, why would the taxpayers consider that we're not providing the best services that the money is intended to be? And that really ties back into our long-term financial plan rather than 1 year kind of financial plan, is that, as everybody in this room know, our cost doesn't stay constant. It would be nice if it does, but it doesn't. So over time, every year, the cost is going to escalate a little bit. By kind of putting away a little bit of this year's tax, is actually going to help offset some of that cost increase in the next year.
Thank you, Sheriff, and Jack. Thank you for that explanation. I would argue, and I'll leave this with you, Jack, because this is your and my expertise. I've always said that there's too doggone many funds, and as you know, our pronouncements and standards say minimize those. That's a basic standard, and we're moving money around. And I think Commissioner Willie said it best at one time. He says, "How is this so really transparent to people who don't work with this?" And this is my 37th time working with it, and I still get confused how you move money around. So just as a thought, I mean, how do you build a budget that's readable? That's the bigger issue. So anyway, that's all my questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Rogers.
Thank you. Jack, I want to be mindful of our time. I don't want to take up too much of the next committee's time. So how are we doing?
I think we're doing okay. There isn't another meeting after this, so we do have just a little bit of flexibility with this. I see that we have one hand remaining in the room. Maybe we can check with Anthony if it's a quick question, and then we'll move on to the next part.
Yeah, thank you. And my general question was exactly what Commissioner Rogers was, but one quick question. Are there any type of cold cases or rape kits that are still waiting to be checked, through DNA analysis? I understand that that's not really in the ERMD within this, but within the overall Sheriff's Department.
Thank you for that question, Anthony. No, we have there's no rape kits which are on hold, waiting to be examined. They are all out the door. We've maintained and stayed caught up and steady with that for a number of years.
Great. And are there any cold case kits that may have DNA evidence that haven't been checked that could, or with modern analysis?
Yeah, that's likely. If you were to take the rape kits aside, those were caught up. There are some cold case homicides for which, coincidentally, the DA's office, through their own initiative, secured a grant, a very significant grant, and we, in concert with the DA's office, hired a cold case investigator, a really talented, recently retired detective from a local area agency, who is working those cases right now.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Anthony. So if there is no more questions for ESPD, and again, there will...
Wait.
Commissioner Willie, go ahead.
Yes. Sorry, Jack, I didn't know how to raise my hand in the Zoom meeting, evidently. No, I think the question for the sheriff is, as we know, this district is growing in density and population. Is there going to come a time in the relatively near future where a 1 officer per 1,000 is not adequate? And are we anticipating that we may be able to, fund more than a 1 officer per 1,000 if we needed to?
Sheriff, you're muted, Sheriff.
Sorry, Commissioner, that's an excellent question. When this district was formed and created, the Family Medical Leave Act was not in place. The additional training requirements were not in place. The academy has doubled in length. Our own internal training timeline has increased. There are some costs associated with service that we just didn't have before. And that's a really reasonable question to look at. We are still able to get the mission done with the staff that we have. Again, I think economies of scale do skew in our favor. but we're just going to have to look really hard at that, especially as we gear up for this next time that the voters get to decide whether they want to continue those services next May.
Jack, sorry, I have one more hopefully quick question, and it's directed mostly for you. How much of that 7% for personnel services was actually PERS increases? Because you and I both know that PERS keep going up. So how would that affect the service in the future if we, can't keep up with that?
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. We actually, our PERS rate at the county did not experience a significant jump this year. So it's that 7%, it includes a mixture of COLA benefits and PERS obviously being part of the benefit. Where we're seeing some of the increases is really on all fronts rather than just PERS. So for the county, this year's PERS, actually, if you give me a second, I can pull the file up right here. So comparing to fiscal year 21-22 to the prior fiscal year, obviously the state runs on a biennial budget, so the rate changes every 2 years. Our increase of rate, so we went from 23 for police and fire, specifically, we went from 23.19% to 24.24%. So that is a 1% jump and about 4.5% if you kind of equalize that 23% to a 100% basis. So it's a bit of a jump, but it's definitely only a part of that 7% increase.
Thank you, Jack. Does anybody have any further questions? I don't see any hands. Nope.
All right, we'll move on to the next part of tonight's presentation. Next slide, please. Oh, actually, we do have a scheduled intermission time because the commissioners have sat through one prior meeting before this committee. So how about 10 minutes intermission? So my clock says 7:36 right now, 7:37. So let's meet back at 7:47. Right. Thanks, everyone.
Hey, Jack and Steven, since you're on now, I just wanted to say that I need to leave for work just after 8 p.m. tonight. So once I leave here, you can make a note for the public record that I've had to leave if we happen to go past 8. So I just want to let you know about that.
Thank you, Anthony. Yeah, it looks like that it's most likely that we're going to go past 8, and thank you for the notice. And our budget committee meeting timing has been consistently a little bit longer than in the past this year, and so we will do a little bit better planning for the time next year.
Yeah, and no problem. And when it was originally scheduled, I didn't have a work conflict, but I do tonight. So,
all right, thank you. All right, so we're at 7:48. Are we all back? I still don't see some cameras coming on. Got all commissioners back. We got Dan back. I just wanted to do a quick check if Raymond and Melissa, are you guys back?
I never left.
All right. And how about Melissa? All right, it looks like Melissa's not back yet. So maybe we'll give it another minute till 7:49 before we get started.
I'm here. Which Melissa?
Oh, Melissa Laird. Sorry,
Yeah,
my
I'm here.
apologies. Oh, okay, perfect. Perfect. All right, so we do have Todd Watkins in the room. Without further ado, we're going to roll right into the Urban Road Maintenance District proposed budget presentation. Go ahead, Todd. You're on mute, Todd.
It would help if I turn my microphone on, wouldn't it? All right. So welcome to those of you who are new to the budget process. And for those that you don't know me, I'm Todd Watkins, and I manage the county's road operations and maintenance division. And we are actually out at the Walnut Street Center, and we handle all of the road and bridge maintenance for the county's infrastructure. So tonight we're going to talk about the Urban Road Maintenance District. And if you want to go ahead and we can get started on the next slide, please. So the Urban Road Maintenance District is the urban unincorporated part of the county. We serve approximately 230,000 people, plus or minus. The most notable element of the district is that if it were
Build all the cameras.
I'm getting some feedback.
I think it was from Raymond, and he just muted. So
okay, good. So the most notable thing about the urban unincorporated area is that if it were a city, it would be second only to Portland as far as population goes. So it's larger than Hillsborough, Beaverton, Salem, Eugene, Bend. So we do serve a huge population area. And with that, we do have all of the things that a city would be dealing with as far as road-related issues. And that's where the value of the Urban Road Maintenance District comes in. Next slide, please. So there are 4 major items that we deal with the district. First and foremost is road maintenance, and we'll talk about that in more detail later. We also handle what we call service requests, and that is when the members of the public call in and they let us know about some sort of defect with the road, and we go ahead and take care of that. Also, we have the Neighborhood Streets program, which is our traffic calming program. And then the most recent addition to the district is our pedestrian and biking improvement program. And we'll talk about that also in more detail later. Next slide, please. Let me just adjust my settings here. Great. So when it comes to payments, for those of you that are not familiar with it, you might take for granted that you're driving on the road and you can get from point A to point B on a relatively smooth surface. But there are a lot of things that are just waiting to happen to that road surface. Most of the roads that we have in the county are made of asphalt. We call it hot mix asphaltic concrete. These are some of the things that can happen. Alligatoring, that's the name, is based on the shape of the breaking up of the asphalt. Cracking, rutting, raveling and delamination. That's when the actual asphalt will break apart. Utility cuts, those are inevitable. And we have a program in place for making sure that the utility companies and contractors repair the road sufficiently, but that's inevitable. And then the other thing that we can't get away from is the weather, right? So the two most treacherous things for pavement are rain and sun, and we get both of them here in the Northwest. And so our pavements are exposed to those things. Fortunately, none of these pictures that you're seeing in front of you are any county roads. These are examples that were pulled off from other agencies. And I'm happy to say that this is not what your earned dollars are providing you. Next slide, please. So one of the ways that we make sure that our roads are in good conditions is that we have an active management of our assets. We use that through what's called asset management. And what we do is we have a payment management system, which we basically track all of the sections of road that we manage, and we track them, and we give those road segments a 0 to 100 score. We actually have a consultant. A consultant comes in and rates the road, visually rates the roads once every 4 years. We have a cycle that we go through, and so we're always making sure that the information in the computer model is consistent with what is actually happening out on the road, because there could be a development happening, there could be a large construction project that isn't being picked up through the computer model. So we always want to make sure that we're keeping that data in line so that we can predict more accurately what's happening with the pavement conditions for planning purposes. The company that we use is Capital Asset and Pavement Services, and they've been providing us years of service, and we can't say enough good things about them. Coming up, though, is kind of some new technology we're going to be employing, and that is a top-to-bottom asset management program called CityWorks, and we went through the RFP process. We have a consultant on board to help us with getting that rolled out, and that'll be the kind of the big project for not just ERM, but also for our road fund roads, the arterials and the collectors. Everything within the system will be starting to be tracked and maintained through this new system. So we're looking forward to that. Some exciting times, and in the coming years, we should see some marked improvement to our reporting and tracking, and just doing even a better job of what we've got going on. Next slide, please. So pavement overlay. So some of the terms we use is overlay and slurry seal. An overlay is what you normally would see when you think about pavement and road getting paved. That's when a dump truck full of hot asphalt, about 325 degrees Fahrenheit, will come in and it'll back into the front end of a paver, raise up the bed, drop it into what's called a hopper. Then an auger will spread that out nice and smooth with a screed, and then like a squeegee. And then what happens is we have a roller that comes in behind and makes it nice and smooth. And when that's done, and after we add that 2 inches of asphalt to a road surface, we'll basically reset the PCI, the pavement condition index, to 100. And so that'll be a brand new road, and it looks great and it rides smooth. And we should expect, a good solid 10 years of service out of that roadway. We have to make sure that we repair any defects that might be under there, or potholes, or anything that might be detrimental, because cracks can what are called reflect. They can come back up to the surface if we don't take care of them. So there is lots of prep work that happens ahead of time. Next slide, please. The other thing that we do on the urban road maintenance district roads is what's called a slurry seal. And a slurry seal is a way for us to put a thin layer of this liquid asphalt. It's called an emulsion. There's water and oil mixed together. with some polymers, and then there's some fine aggregate in there, sand and whatnot, to add some friction so that cars don't go sliding off of it. And we have a machine that, I say we, the contractor has a machine that mixes all that together and then puts it out with this as a slurry, as a thick liquid. It gets spread out with a like a squeegee, and then the crews will go in there and make sure that things like manhole covers and drains and whatnot are covered up. This doesn't add any structure to the road, but it seals cracks and it basically puts on a new surface. And so we can actually get then 6 to 12 points on the PCI range when we do that. We have what's called a 10-10-10 model for our pavement management approach. When a road is first built or after it gets an overlay, we expect 10 years of service out of that. And then another 10 years, or after that first 10 years, we'll do a slurry seal. And then we'll do another slurry seal after 10 years. And then in the 30th year, or the third cycle, will be another overlay. And so that's the model we've been using, and it's worked quite well. And we'll see some more numbers here in a few minutes that actually shows you graphically how we're doing performance-wise. Next slide, please. So we have actually, because the roads in the URM, they're doing so well, they're performing really well. We've actually scaled back our maintenance program a bit. And the contracts before were both pavement overlays and slurry seals. We would do both in the same year. And because we were spending less, needing to spend less, the contracts were getting quite small. And so to make sure that the contracts were of a decent size, and so that we could be efficient with our limited staff, we decided to go to an alternating schedule with the different surface treatments. So 1 year we'll do an overlay, and then 1 year we'll do a slurry seal, and we go back and forth. And that's what this graph shows, is that we do this alternating system, and it works quite well. And so for this coming year, we're actually in an overlay season. And so we're going to get about 4.3 miles of roads that we can overlay. The soil seals, we can get much more just because it's just a thin layer of material versus a more robust process. But that's what we're doing this year. Next slide, please. So performance-wise, again, the district roads are in really good shape. We have a little over 400 miles, about 450 miles that are actually in the district that we maintain. They are urban, local, and neighborhood routes. The target PCI, remember I told you that there's a PCI of a range from 0 to 100. 100 is a brand new road. And 0, we never get into 0. If you're into the single digits, your road is basically at the end of its life. And so working with the advisory committee, we have a citizen advisory committee. Several years ago, we set that target at 75. We said we want the district roads to never get below 75. And with that, that's been our target for our work. And we continue to be above that target range. And for the district, we are in the 83 range for the urban locals. And then for the neighborhood routes, we're at 81. When we do our system and our network ratings by functional class. And so that's the reason why we have those two different numbers there. But overall, we're in the low to mid 80s for our PCI. Compare that to our non-URM roads. So these are the roads that are maintained with the road fund. And as you can see, for example, the rural locals, they have a much lower target, but they're still performing quite well. But it is a different environment that we're working in. Next slide, please. So what are we doing when we're not paving roads or putting down a soil seal? Well, we're doing lots of things. The most common request that we get from people is vegetation. So overgrown vegetation that might be encroaching into the roadway. It might be something that's blocking what we call sight distance at an intersection. So you pull up to an intersection that's not controlled by a signal and you're trying to peer out to see what traffic's doing on the cross street. So that's our most frequent call. But as you can see, there's lots of other things that we do. For dead animals, we don't pick up domestic animals or small mammals. The only things that we deal with are elk and deer. If those are in the roadway that are causing a hazard, we will remove those or at least get them to the side of the road. The miscellaneous and other, that can be things, for example, like graffiti or repairing a shoulder or something like that. That's what we end up spending our time on. So in 1920, which is our last full cycle, fiscal year 1920, we had 451 requests that we handled over the course of the entire fiscal year. And that's been a pretty consistent number over the years. Next slide, please. So the next big program that we have within the district that's funded by EARMD is the Neighborhood Streets program. And this is actually our traffic calming program. It's a multi-step process that if a neighborhood wants to pursue reducing speeds or cut through traffic in their neighborhood, we can work with them, and there's some things that we do. We don't go straight to speed bumps. That's not the first thing. We look at doing education and enforcement first. And then after that happens, and if that's not sufficient, then we can look at devices. Speed bumps are not the only device that we have, or speed humps. We also have what are called speed feedback monitors, and it'll actually, they're not photo radar, but it's a radar unit that when you approach the sign, it will display your speed, and then people will know, oh, hey, I'm doing 35 and a 25 or whatever speed might be. And we've found that that's an effective way as well to slow traffic or deter people from going through a neighborhood. This was recently expanded, this program, in 2020 when we were able to go to the board, and they are now allowing us to expand this onto residential collectors. So these are streets that have that collector functional classification, but they really act like a residential street, the feel and the format of the road. So that is going on now. Next slide, please. It's just an example of what the things are that we can use for the program. We do have these lawn signs, which hopefully get people's attention to let them know that they're maybe driving a little too fast. And then the speed display sign, which actually will tell you what your speed is. Next slide, please. So the most prominent element of the district right now is our pedestrian and biking improvement program. This was a program that was established with another ordinance that the board adopted, and allowed us to build these improvements inside the district boundaries, but we expanded it to not only the locals and the neighborhood routes, but also to collectors and arterials. But again, the key is they had to be within the district boundaries. So an arterial or collector that goes through a city would not be eligible because if it's inside of a city, it's not part of the district. So for example, Murray Boulevard over in the Sexton Mountain area is inside the city of Beaverton, so anything on that road would not be eligible for this program. So these are some examples of some of the projects that we've done, but we'll show you some more better examples in a few minutes. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, the arterials and collectors. We have moved to a biennial selection process. These projects, when we first started, were relatively small. They were infill projects, shoulder widenings, very simple projects. But they really have evolved and matured over time, and they do take a lot of staff and construction and design effort. So we are now doing a biennial selection process so that it gives staff, contractors, consultants, and the committee for that matter, time to really deal with those projects in a timely and effective manner. When this program was first envisioned, we were hopeful that we could do everything within one fiscal year, but we soon learned that that was not going to be possible. And so now these projects are taking anywhere from 1.5 to 2 years from start to finish. So it is a very, it has complicated the accounting and the budgeting phase, but we have a crack financial team, and they take great care in the numbers, and we know exactly where we are with all of these projects. Next slide, please. So the way that we get to our project selection and the way that we get to our road maintenance efforts is through our advisory committee. We have a full house actually with all the positions are filled. And we do have a very active committee, and they will get started soon with the project selection for the 22-23, 23-24 season coming up in July. And so that's going to be the focus of their efforts. And then we hope, if the schedule goes the way we think it will, project selection will occur either September or October. And then what will happen is we will then present their recommendation to the Board of Commissioners. The board, if they adopt the recommendations, will then move into the initial design phase. And we do have money budgeted in this upcoming fiscal year to start the design as early as spring of 22. So it'd be in this upcoming fiscal year, but that way we can get projects designed and then hopefully construction started in the summer of 22. Next slide, please. So we've done a lot of work with the bike and pedestrian improvement program. As you can see, 61 projects. We've had a lot of success and a lot of great feedback. We've really made an impact on neighborhoods, the quality of life. And I do want to have a shout out. I don't think he's on the presentation tonight, but Joe Yonkins and Marla Vick from the Capital Project Services Division, they deliver these projects, and I can't say enough good things about the way that they handle the program under budget, on time, and they just are a great asset and resource for the division and the department to be able to deliver these projects, because they are very complicated. They might seem small in scale, but the complexities are huge when it comes to utility coordination, working with adjacent property owners, trying to really be as mindful and diligent about not disrupting a neighborhood, but at the same time, bringing these improvements to an area. And so I can't say enough good things about them, because it is a daunting task, and they've risen to the occasion every time. And as you can see from the comment at the bottom there, the note that the budget is a very important element to the delivery, and they've done a great job with keeping these projects under budget. Next slide, please. So we did have 13 projects that were selected for the 2021 and 21-22. And so those projects will be funded and moving forward. And then this coming year, again, we're going to start our project selection for the following 2 years. So there is quite a bit of overlap and kind of leapfrogging between the different years. The way that we do this is that we have a project management team. I mentioned our Capital Project Services group delivers the projects. We design most of them using consultants, but we have used some internal county staff. But all of the construction happens through private contractors. So we put them out to bid, and they go through the traditional bidding process. And then we have county inspectors then who work with the contractors during the actual construction phase. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, it's a several months long project, or process, I should say. One thing that we have done recently is that we are trying to improve our outreach to the community. And so we are doing bilingual messaging, in particular the website, and all of the tweets and all of the what's the word I'm looking for? The social media. I had brain freeze there, is all done in Spanish and in English to try to get farther reach into our community for involvement. We do have open houses, online open houses, and we have commenting opportunities for folks. So yeah, we do want to try to get as many people involved as possible, and that's the effort that we've been putting out there now for a couple of years. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, so this is the part where we get to kind of show you and showcase what these projects do for the neighborhood. So there's going to be a handful of before and after pictures, and I think you're going to, if you haven't seen this before, or if you haven't been involved with the ERM program and seen these for firsthand, I think you're going to be impressed with what you're going to see. So Johnson Street, which is over in the Aloha area. Next button of the slide, please. I mean, can you imagine how that must feel like walking down that street now and just feeling much more comfortable than having the before picture. So next slide. Same structure road, just a different section, but you know, this next slide, this next picture is going to really, I mean, that's just, again, a very impressive addition to the neighborhood. We're really proud of what we do to really improve the quality of life for these areas. Next slide, and we can go through these kind of quick. Taylor's Ferry, this is over kind of in the Metzger area. Next slide, again, you know, before and after is night and day. And then we can just, yeah, perfect. This is a great one too. You're going to see a nice crossing now, you know, and obviously the transit there, so it's a much more pleasant experience for the TriMet bus drivers and the riders. So that was the highlight of the program. Now let's get into the money. So revenue, ERMD has seen a relatively steady rise in revenue in the recent years. It is tied to the assessed values. So it's about 25 cents per thousand. So we do have revenue planned estimated at 5.7 million. We will get a little bit of money from the gain share program, so we're expecting a $6.5 million revenue for this coming year. Next slide, please. The Bike and Ped program is at 5.1 million for the projects that have already been designed or they're being designed and then constructed. So that's where that's coming from. We are doing a robust ADA, Americans with Disability Act ramp program. So when we do an overlay, we trigger ADA ramp replacements because that's considered an alteration to the roadway. So we are actually doing quite a few ramp replacements and upgrades throughout the district. I mentioned the surface treatments. That was the overlays. And then just general maintenance. These other numbers, you know, the general service, that's the service request that we talked about. Drainage project, that's the culvert program that we have, a culvert replacement. The neighborhood streets program, that's the traffic calming. And then just the indirects, administration and miscellaneous, right? Keeping the lights on, pens and paper and that sort of thing. So overall, the expenditure is at $9 million. And you're thinking, wait a minute, 9 million is more than the 6.5, and that's true. We do have a fund balance though that we are carrying, and so we will be dipping into the fund balance to make up for that difference. And so we do plan on doing that. We'd like to keep around a little bit more than $5 million as our fund balance, as that's our target. Just because we want to have the cash flow, right? Because the collection of taxes happens in the fall, but a lot of the bulk of the work happens during the summer. So it's always kind of lagging a little bit on our collections versus our expenditures. So I want to make sure we have enough money in the bank to pay the bills, but we are aware of that fund balance, and that's where we're at for the expenditures. Next slide, please. This is just the overall summary. You can see the two numbers there side by side, same information. But all in all, we're looking forward to another successful summer with projects being constructed, projects being selected, and then, yeah, anything else that comes our way, we will certainly deal with them. We have a 24/7 operation here with our crews. We respond to after hours emergencies. We work closely with the sheriff's office for supporting their mission, law enforcement, fire and rescue. We're here to do whatever needs to that we can do to help the cause. Usually that's related to traffic control or other things that we might be able to help out with. For example, we have a water truck, 3,000 gallon water truck, and we offered that up to the fire department last year to the emergency operations center when the fires were happening. And so we do what we can to help whatever's needed within the community. With that being said, I think the next slide is questions. Great. So any questions that anyone has about the Urban Road Maintenance District?
We got one from Daniel Hauser. Go ahead, Daniel.
Daniel.
Todd, long time no see. Long time, although not compared to Ray, member and fan of the URMDAC. I think that if it wasn't obvious from the presentation, the work that you all do is incredible. I've really appreciated the shift over the years to focus on safety and connection. I think that figuring out how we can make our roads safer and make transit and schools more accessible is a really important way for us to advance our equity goals. And so I really hope that we can keep those investments and keep that program coming. So I just want to applaud the work that you all do to maintain our assets. I always think back to when I got to work for the Association of Oregon Counties and see all of the road systems around the state, and always would marvel when I came home at how great our roads were. Even though we certainly hear folks that are a bit more critical, they're probably driving on a City of Beaverton street. But that said, I do really appreciate the work and appreciate this focus on safety that we continue to highlight.
Thank you, Daniel. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Daniel. And then we have Raymond Eck. Go ahead, Raymond. You might still be on mute.
Jack, could you have the host put us on video? There's a bunch of us that are not on video first.
Yeah, that's actually something that's controlled by each individual. So
when I hit start video, it says the host has asked you to start. Okay, now I can start. Start your video.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I think there are several of us that have that. And I also want to thank the URMDAC people over the years. I think I've been on there for about 8 years. And it has graduated from, like Todd said, from small jobs to now we're doing a lot of bigger jobs, and to help the unincorporated area, it's been amazing. My tour of duty has been great to go through all these particular jobs that we've been able to put out for the public, and especially the sidewalks around the schools. Safety around there has been lacking in a lot of ways, especially in the low area, but in other areas too. So I have to congratulate Todd and everybody else that's been associated to the program, and the county commissioners who have been in this program with us all along to support us. I really appreciate it. I thank you much.
Thank you, Ray. Well, I do want to point out something, and I meant to say it earlier, is that, on the cover slide of the budget presentation, there's a picture there of one of our truck and transfers with our crews and our team, not just the crews, but our admin team, our inspectors. Before COVID, we would have an annual end of season barbecue to kind of celebrate a successful construction year, and we'd pull out the rig and we had this group photo, and it just reminded me when I saw that this afternoon, looking at the slide, that, you know, it's a team effort, right? We can't get this done in operations without the support of other divisions, without the support of the community, right? Supporting us, the advisory committee, the commissioners, everybody. And it really does, everybody needs to be involved and participating and supporting the cause to get this done, because no one person, no one team, no one group can get it done. And so, you know, it really does require all of us to make this happen. So kudos to everybody for that.
Thank you, Todd.
Oh, sorry. I think Commissioner Rogers, you have a question too.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, Todd, good presentation. And you're right. This started out as a very minor program in terms of dollars. We knew that there was a lot and kind of chipped away at some needs over the years. But at some point, I'd love to know what your forecasted cost of all of the improvements that you hope to do within the area and how that matches the revenue stream. I feel like, you know, we're putting our fingers in the wall, the proverbial Dutch boy. And I think there's many, many holes that we're not able to get to. So I've never had a good vision because we didn't start out having too grandiose an idea of what we wanted to do, other than we wanted to start chipping. And I think Ray mentioned it in his comments, and others have done that in the past before Ray. And they've all done a really, really good job of managing money. And you've got your payment index up. You've got a number of active transportation projects done. You're looking at bigger projects that's been mentioned, but I guess I don't know where we're going exactly in terms of dollars that are going to be raised and projects. And it'd be almost nice to have an MSTIP approach. And you and I have worked on that many, many years, so you're familiar with that. And say, well, what's our total cost? What are we really looking at? And what's it going to take to get there?
Right. Well, we actually have a list, and the number escapes me right now, but I want to say it's like 150 plus or minus projects that have been identified that are inside of the urban road maintenance district boundaries that have been suggested. Most of those have come from neighborhoods, but I don't have off the top of my head, Commissioner, what that number is, either the quantity or the dollar amount. But I can certainly follow up and have that for you at the public hearing.
Thank you, Todd. No, I've seen lists, and they keep getting added to because we have other needs, and we've been expansive, but I've never really gotten an idea in my mind as to how many total dollars, which is always the key number, and what's that income stream, because it's probably going to be very meager flow versus what our needs are. So it'd be nice to know.
Yeah, no, I'll have that for you at the public hearing.
All right. Any other questions or comments or discussions from the community? Oh, I see a hand up from Melissa Laird. Go ahead, Melissa.
Yeah, I just had a question. I see overall that the budget for loot is going to be down 10% overall, the big budget. Is that going to have any impact on the resources that you need to do these projects in ERMD?
No, so ERMD is unique because it's a separate funding source from the road fund. And so the ERMD dollars will be spent on ERMD, and we won't be affected per se by that road fund decrease. So the money that's collected by ERMD will be spent on ERMD projects or on the ERMD Neighborhood Streets program or on the road maintenance. So it's a standalone funding source.
Yeah, I guess my concern was more if you're using some resources or consultants outside of ERMD, you know, in that, are those going to get affected? Are you using resources that are going to decrease and that's going to cause delays or you know, something with these projects?
Yeah, no, I don't see that happening. I you know, knock on wood, ERMD has been a very stable and predictable and reliable funding source, and it's really served the community well over the years, and I don't see that changing. So I think we're going to be in good shape. And again, our plan is to continue kind of down this path as far as the cycles of projects and maintenance. And really, you know, we've done a good job, I think, not just at the staff level, but with the committee of thinking about everything that's happening within the district. And so I don't plan on having any, or I don't think there's going to be any big surprises that would affect that.
Thank you.
So, but Commissioner, I did just get a message that we have 156 projects. So I was close on the list for the number of projects. So 156, and the total price tag is $152 million. So that's where we're at with kind of the vision of the program. So we have a little bit of work to do.
Daniel, you have another question?
I just want to say it sounds like Commissioner Rogers and Todd are identifying an excellent need for additional property tax revenues to support increase in savings and investments.
I didn't say that.
All right, if there is no further questions at tonight's meeting, we'll move on to the next segment. And please keep in mind that the question can continue to flow again to the email address that I have provided, finance_budget@sco.washington.or.us. And so as far as the next step goes, the next step will be the May 26th budget hearing, which is scheduled at 6:30 p.m. to 7:20 p.m. with public testimony at 6:50 p.m. Time certain. And obviously there will be deliberation time before and after the public testimony, and the budget committee is to consider approving the proposed budget at that particular meeting. And once that budget is approved, we move on to the Board of County Commissioners for adoption. And this year is scheduled at June 15th, 2021 at 10 a.m. board meeting. And a public testimony will again be available at that adoption. And then that's the rest of the process. Are there any questions or comments about the rest of the process? Alrighty, next slide, please. Well, thank you very much for your participation on this very important part of the Washington County's budget process. And I want to thank you and hand it back to Chair Stephen Barron to adjourn the meeting.
All right, thank you, Jack, and thank you, Chair Harrington, and all the commissioners and the staff. I'm moving around here on the screen. It's been great. This is my second year and looking forward to continuing. And since Jack, you know, I'm stickler for the rules, do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting for the night?
I don't think everyone's paying attention to
wave hello to Dan's son. Everybody wave to Dan's son. Hi.
Dan's son should make motions.
I got a second.
All right. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nope. All right, our meeting's adjourned until May 26th at 6:30, right, Jack?
Correct.
All right.
Thank you, Chair Barron. Good night, everyone.
Have a good night.
job, Jane.